Morning, good morning. Kumusta po kayong lahat? Breakfast po tayo.
I know that's uncomfortable because most of us have built our entire identity around effort. Being the person who shows up early and leaves late, around the quiet pride of being busy. And I'm not here to take that away from you, but I am here to ask, what has it actually built? Here in America, we work more hours than almost any other developed nation on earth. And yet, most people over 30 are still living paycheck to paycheck, still trading time for money, still wondering when the breakthrough is coming. The people building quiet lives, lasting, unglamorous lives, doing something different, not harder. Different. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly what that looks like. And lesson 7 is the one that tends to stop people completely, because it asks a question most of us have been avoiding for years. If you're ready, comment quiet wealth below, and let's get into it. There's something nobody tells you when you're in your 30s, grinding away at a job that pays the bills, but barely touches the life you actually imagine for yourself. Nobody pulls you aside and says, hey, the way you're doing this might be the very thing holding you back. Instead, you get the same message on repeat. Work harder, stay later, give more. And for a long time, most of us believe it. I believed it too. But here's what I've come to understand, slowly and a little uncomfortably. Busyness is not a strategy. It's a costume. And a lot of us have been wearing it so long, we've forgotten there's a person underneath. Think about the last time you felt genuinely proud of how busy you were. Maybe you told someone you were slammed at work, juggling 3 projects, barely sleeping, and they nodded like that meant something good, like suffering through your schedule was proof of your worth. That's the trap. Not the work itself, but the belief that the volume of your effort is the same thing as the value of your output. There's an old teaching from Jewish tradition that goes something like this. A wise man once watched 2 farmers working side by side in the same field. One worked from sunrise to sunset, never stopping, never resting, always moving. The other worked until midday, then sat under a tree, watched the clouds, and went home early. After the harvest, the second farmer's yield was 3 times larger. The first farmer was furious. How? He demanded. The wise man smiled and said, you worked the land, he worked his mind first. That story stuck with me because it names something real. Productivity isn't about the hours you log, it's about whether you're doing the right thing with the hours you have. And most of us, if we're honest, are logging a lot of hours doing things that feel urgent, but aren't actually important. Here's a simple way to test that. Think about your last full workday. Now ask yourself, how many of those hours moved something meaningful forward? Not just kept the wheels turning, actually moved something forward. For most people, the honest answer is 2, maybe 3 hours. The rest is noise dressed up as necessity. So what do you do with that? You start protecting those 2 or 3 hours like they're the most valuable thing you own, because they are. You stop filling your calendar to feel busy, and you start designing your day around the work that actually compounds over time. 1 focused hour on the right thing beats 8 scattered hours on everything. That shift sounds small. It isn't. When you stop performing busyness and start practicing intention, something quiet starts to happen. You begin to notice where your energy actually goes. You start questioning meetings that produce nothing, tasks you inherited from someone else's anxiety, obligations that have been on your list so long you forgot why they're there. Stripping those away isn't laziness. It's clarity. And clarity, it turns out, is where wealth begins. Not in the extra hours, but in the questions you finally have time to ask. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because once you free up even a little mental space, your brain starts doing something it couldn't do when it was overloaded. It starts connecting dots. And those connections, the quiet, unhurried kind, are where real opportunities live. Which brings me to something that might surprise you, especially if you've always believed that your best thinking happens when you're deep in the work. Most people assume their best thinking happens when they're deep in the work. Head down, screen bright, coffee going cold on the desk. That's when the real breakthroughs come, right? That's what we've been told. Push through, stay in it, don't stop until it's done. But I want you to think about the last genuinely good idea you had. Not a decent idea, a really good one. The kind that made you pause and think, wait, that might actually work. Where were you when it came to you? I'd be willing to bet you weren't at your desk. You were in the shower, on a walk, lying in bed.
Good morning. Please give me a thumbs up. Hi, Cheng Yon na. Sorry to pronounce your name. Hi, Sanya. Good morning.
When your brain is overloaded, genuinely
Thank you
overloaded,
for the
most working adults are in
like.
2026, it loses access to what researchers call the default mode network. That's the part of your brain that makes unexpected connections, synthesizes information across different domains, and generates insight. It only activates when you're not actively trying, when you give it room, when you stop demanding answers and let the mind wander. Charles Darwin understood this before anyone had a name for it. He worked roughly 4 hours a day. That's it. He had a set route he walked every afternoon. He called it his thinking path. And he made it a non-negotiable part of his day. Not as a reward for finishing work, as part of the work itself.
Hi, Shogun.
His
Good
most important
morning.
ideas didn't come from sitting at his desk for 12 hours. They came from those walks, from the silence between thoughts, from giving his mind permission to roam without a deadline attached to it. Now, I'm not saying you need to walk in circles for an hour every afternoon, but I am asking you to consider what you've been crowding out. What ideas haven't surfaced yet because you've never given them the quiet they needed to rise. Here's what tends to happen when people are chronically overworked. And I mean the kind of overworked where you feel guilty taking a lunch break. Decision quality drops. Not dramatically at first, but steadily. The choices you make about money, about time, about who you give your energy to, they all get slightly worse. You start reacting instead of thinking. You say yes to things because you're too tired to evaluate them properly. You avoid hard financial conversations because your bandwidth is already gone by 6 p.m. And those small, low-quality decisions compound just like good ones do, just in the opposite direction. Benjamin Franklin, who was by any measure one of the most productive humans in American history, had a habit he kept his entire life. Every evening he asked himself one question: what good have I done today? Not how much did I get done, what good? That distinction is everything. He wasn't measuring output, he was measuring meaning. And that reorientation, that small evening pause, is what kept him from confusing motion with progress. So here's something concrete you can try, not as a productivity hack, because I'm not really interested in hacks, but as a genuine experiment. Take your most important work, whatever it is, and give it 4 focused hours. Protect those hours completely, then stop. Don't try to squeeze in 2 more. Don't check emails to feel productive. Just stop and let your mind decompress. See what surfaces in the hours after. Notice what ideas come up when you're cooking dinner, taking a walk, or just sitting somewhere without your phone. Write those down. Not because every passing thought is gold, but because you'll start to see a pattern. Your best thinking doesn't happen during the grind. It happens in the margins around it. And once you start trusting that, something shifts. You stop filling every gap in your day with more input. You start protecting your own stillness like it has value. Because it does. More than most people realize until it's been gone for a long time. But there's a deeper layer to this that most people never reach. And it has less to do with how you work and everything to do with what your time is actually being traded for. Because if you're still exchanging hours for a paycheck, no matter how efficiently you work those hours, you're still playing a game with a ceiling built right into its rules. There's a story that comes from ancient Babylon, one of the oldest civilizations that ever figured out how money actually works. Not how it's supposed to work in theory, but how it actually moves, accumulates, and grows in real life. The story goes like this. A young man named Arkad grew up poor in the city of Babylon. Same neighborhood, same starting point as everyone around him. But somewhere along the way, he became the richest man in the city, and people noticed. They asked him, how? What did you do differently? And his answer was so simple, it almost sounds like a disappointment until you sit with it long enough. He said, I learned to keep a portion of everything I earned. And then I put that portion to work so that it could earn on its own. That's it. No secret investment, no lucky break, no extra hours worked. He just stopped trading all of his time for money and started making a small portion of that money trade time for him. Now here's why that matters so much in 2026 specifically. The average American worker spends somewhere between 40 and 50 hours a week at work. That's roughly 2,000 hours a year. And in exchange for those hours, they receive a paycheck. Which is fair, that's the deal. But the deal has a ceiling, a hard one, because you only have so many hours, and when the hours stop, the money stops too. That's not a flaw in the system. That's the design of it. The people who build quiet wealth, the kind that doesn't announce itself on social media, the kind that doesn't require a press release, they figure out early that the goal isn't to earn more per hour. The goal is to eventually need fewer hours, because money is moving on their behalf while they sleep, while they rest, while they take that walk. This doesn't require a large starting amount. That's the part people get wrong. They think this is a game for people with extra money lying around. It isn't. Arkad started with almost nothing. What he started with was intention. He decided before he knew how it would work out that some portion of what came in would not leave. It would stay, and it would be put to work. Think of it like this. Imagine you hire someone to do a small job for you. Maybe they carry a package across town. You pay them. They go home. That's the end of the relationship. Now imagine instead that you hire someone who once paid, goes out and finds more work on your behalf, brings back more, and repeats that every single day without being asked again. That's what money does when it's invested rather than spent. It keeps working after you've stopped. The shift from one to the other doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't require overhauling your life this weekend. It just requires one decision made consistently. That before you pay your rent, your groceries, your streaming subscriptions, you pay yourself first. Even if it's a small amount, even if it feels almost embarrassingly small, you start there. You automate it so you never have to rely on willpower. And then you leave it alone and let it do what money does when it's given time and direction. What most people do instead is the reverse. They earn, they spend, and if there's anything left at the end of the month, which there usually isn't, they save that. But there's almost never anything left because spending expands to meet income almost every time, unless you make an active decision to interrupt that pattern. The ancient Babylonians called this paying yourself first. Jim Rohn called it the foundation of financial independence. Warren Buffett has lived it so completely that it's basically the entire story of his wealth. It's not new, it's not complicated, but it requires you to really believe that your future self deserves the first cut, not the last. And here's the quiet irony in all of this. The less you depend on your working hours to generate all of your income, the better you work during those hours. Because you're not desperate. You're not grinding from fear. You're working from choice. And that distinction changes everything about the quality of what you produce, which is a good place to pause. Because there's something most people completely misunderstand about rest. They think it's the opposite of wealth building. But the people who have quietly figured this out treat rest the same way they treat investment, deliberately, strategically, and with a kind of discipline that looks, from the outside, like doing nothing. Most people feel guilty when they're not working. You probably know that feeling. It's a Sunday afternoon, the house is quiet, there's nothing urgent demanding your attention, and instead of feeling peaceful, you feel vaguely uncomfortable, like you're forgetting something, like you should be doing something. That low hum of guilt that follows you into the weekend, into your evenings, into the moments that are supposed to be yours. We don't talk about that guilt enough, because it's not random, it was installed. Somewhere along the way, most of us absorb the idea that rest is something you earn, not something you're entitled to. That you rest when the work is done, that the work is never done, so you never fully rest. You wonder why you're always tired. Here's what I find remarkable about the Jewish tradition of Sabbath. It wasn't designed as a reward for a productive week. It was built into the structure of the week as a requirement. One full day, completely set aside. No commerce, no labor, no planning, no problem solving. Not because the ancient rabbis were lazy, but because they understood something that modern productivity culture has completely forgotten. Recovery is not the absence of work. It is a form of work. It is the work that makes all other work possible. The Sabbath wasn't passive. It was intentional. You prepared for it. You created conditions for it. You protected it. And in doing so, you protected your capacity to show up fully for the other 6 days. The rest wasn't incidental to the productivity. It was the engine underneath it. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who arguably had more on his plate than any person alive during his time, wrote extensively in his private journals about the practice of stillness. Not stillness as inaction, but stillness as a deliberate return to center. He wrote about the importance of stepping back from the noise of decisions and demands, not to escape them, but to see them more clearly. He called it retreating into yourself, and he did it regularly, even while running an empire. What's striking is that neither of these traditions, the Jewish Sabbath nor the Stoic practice of stillness, was for people with easy lives. They were developed by and for people under enormous pressure, because those people understood something. The mind that never rests makes worse decisions. And worse decisions, compounded over years, are expensive in ways that never show up on a single invoice. Think about the last major financial decision you made when you were exhausted. Maybe you agreed to something you shouldn't have. Maybe you avoided a conversation you needed to have. Maybe you bought something impulsively because your brain was too depleted to distinguish between what you wanted and what you actually needed. That's not a character flaw. That's biology. A tired mind reaches for the easiest option, not the best one. So what does intentional rest actually look like in practice? Not a vacation you need to recover from. Not a Netflix binge that leaves you feeling emptier than before. Something closer to what the Sabbath described, a genuine break in the pattern. One day, or even one afternoon, when you make a quiet agreement with yourself, I am not going to solve anything right now. I am going to let my mind wander, let my body slow down, let the week settle. Some people walk. Some people cook slowly. Some people sit in a garden or a park without their phone and just watch how time moves when you stop chasing it. The specific activity matters less than the intention behind it. The intention is this: I am doing this because I matter enough to restore. Not because I've earned it, because I need it. And because the version of me that shows up after genuine rest makes better choices about money, about time, about what I say yes to. Schedule it the way you'd schedule anything important. Put it in your calendar with the same seriousness you'd give a meeting with someone you respect. Because that's exactly what it is, a meeting with yourself. The self that doesn't perform, doesn't optimize, just exists for a while. And here's the thing nobody tells you about that self. It's often the smartest one in the room. The ideas it generates, the clarity it carries, the calm it brings back into the rest of your week. Those are not small things. They are, quietly, the foundation of every good decision you'll make. But rest alone isn't the whole picture, because there's a counterintuitive force that kicks in when you deliberately limit your working hours, and it has nothing to do with relaxation. It has everything to do with what happens to your mind when it knows time is running out. There's a principle that was formally named in 1955 by a British historian named Cyril Northcote Parkinson. But honestly, most of us have been living proof of it our entire working lives without realizing it had a name. The principle is simple. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. That's it. If you give yourself 8 hours to do something that could be done in 3, it will take 8 hours. Not because you're lazy. Because the mind naturally adjusts its pace to match the container you put it in. You've seen this in your own life. Think about the last time you had a deadline that actually scared you a little. Not a fake deadline, a real one with real consequences. Something was due by noon, and it was already 10. I'd be willing to bet you got it done, and I'd be willing to bet it wasn't bad. In fact, it might have been sharper than the version you would have produced if you had 3 days and no pressure. Because under genuine constraint, your brain stops negotiating with itself. It stops browsing. It stops rearranging what's already good enough. It just moves. There's a story I think about often when this comes up. It's set in a small Jewish village generations ago. A master carpenter, a man known throughout the region for the quality of his work, took on an apprentice. The apprentice was talented but slow. He would spend days on a single chair, adjusting, sanding, reconsidering. The work was beautiful, but it was never finished. The carpenter watched this for a while. Then one morning, he walked over and said, "You have until sundown to finish the next chair, not a day more." The apprentice panicked. Sundown was 6 hours away. But he worked, really worked, with a focus he'd never found before. And the chair he produced that day was the finest thing he'd ever made, not despite the pressure. Because of it, the carpenter smiled and said, "You were not slow because you were careful. You were slow because you had no reason to stop." That story captures something important. Constraint isn't the enemy of quality. It's often the condition that produces it. When you have unlimited time, you spend a portion of it on doubt, revisiting decisions already made, second-guessing choices that were fine the first time, polishing things that didn't need polishing. But when time is genuinely limited, doubt becomes a luxury you can't afford. You make the call and move
Bakit
forward.
tawag sila?
This is why some of the most effective people you'll ever meet seem, from the outside, like they're barely trying. They're barely trying. They're working inside tight containers they've deliberately built for themselves. They time box their tasks. They set their own deadlines before anyone else does. They treat their working hours like a precious and finite resource, because they are. And they protect the edges of those hours with real discipline. Here's what that looks like practically. Instead of opening your laptop and working until you run out of momentum, which is what most people do, you decide in advance that a specific task gets 90 minutes. Set a timer. Close everything else. Tell yourself this is the only thing that exists for the next 90 minutes. Then stop when the timer goes off, whether it feels done or not. Rest for 15 minutes. Then go again if needed with another container. What you'll find fairly quickly is that your output doesn't decrease. In most cases, it improves, because you've removed the option of drifting. You've made the work the only available activity, and you've made the end of it visible and real. And something else happens too, something subtler. When you consistently finish your most important work in less time than you used to, you start to trust yourself differently. You stop believing that more hours automatically mean better results. You start evaluating your effort by its quality, not its quantity. That shift in how you measure yourself, from hours logged to value created, is one of the quietest and most significant changes a person can make in their working life. It also, over time, frees up something that most busy people treat as a fantasy: margin. Space in your day that isn't spoken for. And what you do with that margin, or more precisely, who you spend it with, turns out to matter far more than most people expect when it comes to building a life that actually has wealth in it, not just income. There's a version of success that looks very lonely from the inside. You're working hard, putting in the hours, doing everything you're supposed to do, but you're doing it mostly alone. Your social life has quietly shrunk to almost nothing. Your friendships have become occasional text messages you keep meaning to respond to. Your weekends are either more work or recovery from work. And somewhere underneath the busyness, there's a nagging sense that you're building something, but you're not entirely sure what or for whom. I think a lot of people in their 30s recognize that feeling without having words for it. The isolation that comes not from being a loner, but from being too busy to maintain the connections that actually make life, and ironically wealth, possible. Here's something that gets left out of almost every conversation about financial success. The people who build lasting, quiet wealth rarely do it in isolation. Not because they're networkers in the aggressive, business card exchanging sense of the word, but because wealth, at its core, is relational. It moves through trust. It opens doors through reputation. It compounds through communities of people who know each other, believe in each other, and create opportunities for each other that never show up on any job board or investment platform. The ancient Phoenicians understood this better than almost any civilization in history. They were the great traders of the ancient world, sailing across the Mediterranean, building wealth across dozens of cities and cultures. And historians who've studied them closely note something interesting. Their most important business didn't happen on the docks or in the warehouses. It happened at the dinner table. Long meals, unhurried conversations, relationships built slowly over shared food and honest talk. The deals that moved the most value were made between people who trusted each other deeply. And that trust was built not through contracts, but through time spent together without an agenda. There's a teaching in Jewish tradition that speaks to this directly. It says that a man's wealth is not measured by what he owns, but by who would stand beside him if he lost it all. That's not just a moral sentiment. It's a practical observation about how resilient wealth actually works. The person with deep relationships has access to information, to opportunities, to support during setbacks, in ways that the isolated high earner simply doesn't. The network isn't decoration around the wealth. In many cases, it is the wealth. Think about the most significant opportunities that have come into your life. Not the ones you found by searching, the ones that came to you. A job offer from someone who thought of you. A piece of advice that changed how you saw a situation. An introduction that opened a door you didn't know existed. Almost certainly, those things came through a relationship, through someone who knew you, liked you, and trusted you enough to connect you with something valuable. And now think about how much time you've spent in the last year genuinely investing in those kinds of relationships. Not networking, investing. Showing up for people without an immediate return in mind. Having real conversations that go somewhere. Being present enough that someone would actually think of you when something good crossed their path. For most busy people, the honest answer is not much. Because relationships require the one thing that overwork steals first: unhurried time. This doesn't require grand gestures. It doesn't require a social calendar that exhausts you. It starts smaller than that. One or two genuine connections a month, maintained with real attention. A phone call that goes longer than you planned because the conversation is actually good. A meal with someone whose thinking challenges yours. The habit of reaching out to people not because you need something, but because you remembered them and wanted them to know it. Those small investments made consistently over the years build something that no spreadsheet can fully capture. A web of people who know you, respect you, and want good things for you. And that web, when the time comes, when the opportunity appears, when the hard season arrives, when the door opens unexpectedly, is often worth more than any single financial asset you could name. There's a quiet kind of wealth that lives in being known by the right people. Not famous, Not influential in the broadcast sense, just genuinely known, genuinely trusted by a handful of people who are themselves living with intention. Which brings me to the last thing I want to share with you today. And I'll warn you, it's the one that tends to make people uncomfortable. Not because it's harsh, but because it asks a question that most of us have been avoiding for a long time. I want to tell you about a man I know. I'll call him Daniel, because that's close enough to his real name that he'd recognize himself, but far enough that he'd forgive me for telling his story. Daniel was 38 years old, living in a mid-sized city in the Midwest, working 60 hours a week at a project management job that paid well enough but cost him something he couldn't quite name at the time. He had a good title, a decent apartment, a car that was newer than he needed, and a persistent low-grade exhaustion that had become so familiar he'd stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator until it suddenly goes quiet. He wasn't unhappy exactly. He was just absent. Present in his body, absent from his life. One Thursday afternoon, not a Monday, not after some dramatic event, just a regular Thursday, he handed in his resignation. No backup plan is fully formed, no safety net perfectly in place. Just a clear, quiet sense that if he stayed one more year, he would lose something in himself that he might not get back. His family was worried. His friends thought he was having a breakdown. His mother called him twice a week for a month to ask if he was okay, in the tone people use when they already think the answer is no. The cultural message was loud and unanimous. What are you doing? You had something good. You're throwing it away. You're being irresponsible. You're being naive. And here's what Daniel did with that noise. He got quiet.
I build my
Not defensive,
mansion
not
next to
combative, just quiet. He started sleeping for 8 hours. He started cooking his own food. He started reading things that had nothing to do with his career. He started taking long walks in the late morning when everyone else was in a meeting somewhere. And he started noticing things about himself, about money, about what he actually valued versus what he'd been performing for other people's approval. In that first year, he didn't make much. He consulted occasionally, took on small projects, and kept his expenses genuinely lean, not as a sacrifice, as a choice. And in the space that opened up, he started paying attention to opportunities he'd been too busy to notice before. A small rental property that came through a friend. A consulting arrangement that paid him more per hour than his old salary did, because he had time to do the work properly and a reputation that preceded him. A habit of investing consistently that he'd started years earlier and simply left alone to grow. By the end of the third year, he had 3 income streams. None of them required 60 hours a week. None of them required him to be somewhere he didn't want to be. And none of them were visible to the people who had worried about him, because Daniel had no interest in performing his wealth the way he'd once performed his work ethic. He told me once, over coffee, that the strangest part of the whole thing was how ordinary it felt. Not triumphant, not like a movie ending, just quiet. Like he'd finally stopped holding his breath and forgotten that he'd ever been holding it. And I think about that a lot, the ordinariness of it. Because I think most of us have been sold a version of success that's supposed to look a certain way. Busy and visible and impressive from the outside. And in chasing that version, we sometimes walk straight past a life that would actually suit us. A life that's smaller in its noise and larger in its meaning. Here's the question Daniel asked himself on that Thursday afternoon. The one that changed everything. He didn't ask, what should I do next? He asked something harder. He asked if no one could see how hard I was working, would I still be working this hard? Sit with that for a moment. If the effort you're putting in right now, the hours, the stress, the sacrifices, if none of it was visible to anyone, if there were no performance to give, no approval to earn, no image to maintain, would you still be doing it this way? For a lot of people, the honest answer is no. And that's not a failure. It's a compass. It's pointing somewhere. Somewhere quieter, slower, and probably closer to what you actually want than where you currently are. Quiet wealth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't hustle loudly or exhaust publicly. It accumulates in the margins, in the rest, in the focus, in the relationships, in the small, consistent choices made by someone who has stopped trying to prove something and started trying to build something real. Daniel isn't the richest person I know, but he might be the freest. And at the end of the day, when you strip away the noise and the performance and the comparison, isn't that what most of us are actually working toward? We've just heard 7 ideas that, on the surface, might seem counterintuitive. Work less, rest on purpose, protect your time, invest in people, stop performing effort, and start building something real. None of it is complicated, but simple and easy are 2 very different things. The truth is, quiet wealth isn't a secret system or a shortcut. It's a series of small, unglamorous decisions made consistently by someone who has gotten honest with themselves about what actually matters. Someone who stopped measuring their days and hours logged and started measuring them in value created, in rest taken, in connections deepened. You don't have to overhaul everything tomorrow. Pick one thing from what you heard today, just one, and let it change how you move through this week. Maybe that's protecting 2 focused hours. Maybe that's scheduling 1 genuine conversation. Maybe it's simply asking yourself Daniel's question before you agree to something that doesn't serve you. Comment quiet wealth below if something in this video landed differently than you expected. I read everyone, and it helps more people find their way to this conversation. And if you want to go deeper on building a life that's rich without being loud, the next video is already waiting for you.
Alam natin lahat kung gaano kahalaga ang pera. Kapag marami ka nito, marami ka ring options. Nabibili mo yung mga bagay na nagpapasaya sa'yo. Hindi ka naman problema kung saan kakain. At kaya mo i-provide ang sarili mong pangangailangan at pangangailangan ng iyong pamilya. Ito ang desire at intention natin lahat. Ito ang dahilan kaya willing tayong magtrabaho para maabot yung freedom na ating inaasam. Pero ito ba ang tamang formula? Pagtatrabaho ba ang nag-iisang sagot para ma-achieve ang financial freedom? Kung obserbahan mo ang mga tao sa iyong paligid, nakikita mo bang may freedom ng 30 years na sa kanilang trabaho? Malamang ay majority sa kanila ay nagtatrabaho dahil walang choice. Kung hihinto sila sa pagtatrabaho, wala na rin silang kikitain. At dito mo makikita at malalaman ang problema. Ang problema na wala kang income kapag wala kang trabaho. Hindi ito problema kung bata ka pa at malusog pa ang iyong katawan. Pero kapag hindi mo binago ang ganitong strategy hanggang sa iyong pagtanda, malaki ang chance na hindi mo kayang suportahan ang iyong sarili at iaasa mo sa iyong mga anak ang iyong mga pangangailangan. Masakit magtanggapin, pero ito ang katotohanan ng karamihan sa ating mga Pinoy. So ano ang dapat mong gawin para hindi hahantong sa ganito ang iyong buhay? Ang una mong gagawin ay maghanap ka ng trabaho. Ito ang una mong responsibilidad, ang magkaroon ng sariling income. Hindi income ng iyong magulang, income ng iyong kapatid, kundi sarili mong income. Pangalawa, every time na matatanggap mo ang iyong sahod, itabi agad ang minimum of 10% galing dito at huwag mo itong galawin. Huwag mo itong ipauna, huwag ibili ng bagong gadget at mag-focus ka lang na palakihin ito. Tapos yung natirang 90%, doon mo ibase ang iyong lifestyle. Kung hindi mo afford na mag-taxi at bumili ng mamahaling kape every week, huwag mo itong bilhin. Tiis-tiis lang muna at sundin mo lang ang iyong budget. Pangatlo, mag-aaral ka kung paano mag-invest ng pera. Kapag meron ka ng income at meron ka ng naiipon, mas mabuting bigyan mo ng trabaho ang iyong ipon para meron kang katulong sa pagkita ng pera. Ito ang tinatawag na investing. Gagamitin mo ang iyong pera at ilagay sa isang asset na kayang mag-generate ng income. Ang iyong asset o investment ay ang golden goose na kapag inalagaan ng maayos ay kaya magbigay sa iyo ng unlimited golden eggs. May mga taong inaasa sa kanilang trabaho ang kanilang income, pero yung mga mayayaman, nakafocus sila sa pagpapalaki ng kanilang assets. Dahil kapag darating na yung time na gusto na nilang mag-retiro o nakapag-desisyon sila na gusto nilang huminto sa pagtatrabaho, malaya silang gawin ito dahil meron silang income. Maraming dahilan kung bakit mahalaga ang mag-invest. Una, para malabanan mo ang inflation. Kung hindi mo pa alam ang meaning ng salitang inflation, ito yung pagtaas sa presyo ng mga bilihin at pagbaba sa halaga ng ating pera. Halimbawa, kung meron kang 100 pesos ngayon, tapos ang presyo ng bigas ay 50 pesos per kilo, kaya kang bumili ng 2 kilo. Pero kung nagkaroon ng inflation at naging 53 pesos na per kilo ang presyo ng bigas, nababawasan na ang halaga o purchasing power ng iyong 100 pesos at hindi na yung sapat para makabili ka ng 2 kilo ng bigas. So kung patuloy na tumataas ang presyo ng mga bilihin, tapos yung income mo ay ganun pa rin, maapektuhan ka talaga ng inflation. Kaya napakahalaga na mag-invest. Kapag meron kang pera na nagtatrabaho sa iyo at nagbibigay sa iyo ng interest, meron kang pangontra sa inflation. Pangalawang dahilan kung bakit mahalaga ang mag-invest ay katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, hindi habang buhay mananatili tayong bata. Kaya kailangan natin paghandaan ngayon ang ating hinaharap. Kapag marami kang investment, malaki ang chance na mabibigyan mo ng mabuting pinakitasan ang iyong sarili dahil meron kang money-making machine na nagbibigay sa iyo ng passive income. Marami pang dahilan kung bakit mahalaga ang mag-invest ng pera at i-discuss na lang natin yan sa iba pa naming videos. Dahil ang main topic natin ngayon ay saan ka pwede mag-invest. Ito ang madalas mong tanong, saan mo pwede ilagay ang iyong ipon para kikita ka pa ng pera. Saan safe mag-invest yung hindi scam. Sasagutin natin yun ngayon. Ipagpapalala sa iyo ang investments na pwede mo ilagay ng pera. Make sure na malista mo ang 5 assets na i-discuss ko para ma-review mo ito pagkatapos ng panahuli ng video. So simulan na agad natin talakayin ang unang investment. Asset number 1, pag-ibig in P2. Siguro naman ay familiar ka na sa pag-ibig in P2. Isa ito sa popular investment dito sa Pilipinas. Ang kagandahan sa pag-ibig investment ay less hassle, tax-free, low risk, at saka kahit minimum wage o worka ay pwede kang mag-invest dahil nagre-require lang ito ng minimum of 500 pesos na initial investment. Ayon sa website ng pag-ibig, ang kanilang average na dividend rate taon ay 6%. So kung ikaw yung tipo ng tao na gusto mag-ipon and at the same time nakikita yung ipon mo, bagay sa iyo ang mag-invest sa pag-ibig ng P2. Ang programa ito ay para sa mga kasalukuyan at previous member ng pag-ibig. Para ito sa mga tao nagkakaroon ng low-risk investment at gustong ma-diversify yung kanilang investment portfolio. One thing to consider lang kung gusto mong mag-invest dito ay siguraduhin mo na ang perang ipapasok mo ay extra o perang hindi mo gagamitin sa ibang bagay dahil mayroong maturity period ang pag-i-invest dito which is 5 years. Ibig sabihin, hindi mo pa magagamit ang perang pinasok mo sa investment hanggat hindi pa naabot nito ang kanyang maturity. Pero regarding dun sa dividend o interest ng iyong investment, ibibigay mo naman ang pag-ibig sa iyo taon-taon. At desisyon mo yun kung gagamitin mo ito o ibabalik sa iyong investment para mas lumaki pa ito lalo. So advice ko kung gusto mo mag-invest dito ay una, mag-invest ka lang ng sakto. Hindi yung sa pilitan na paglalagay ng malaking halaga pero sure ka na sa iba mong pangangailangan. Pangalawa, dapat meron kang emergency fund. Kung hindi mo pwedeng galawin yung pera na nilagay mo sa iyong investment, mas mabuting may pera kang nakalaan para sa mga unexpected na pangyayari. So ang mabuti mong gawin ay i-divide mo ang iyong ipon. Pwede mo gawin 50% sa investment at 50% sa emergency fund. Halimbawa, kung kaya mo mag-ipon ng 10,000 pesos buwan buwan, ilagay mo ng 5,000 pesos sa pag-ibig in P2 at ang kalahating 5,000 pesos naman ay para sa iyong emergency fund. Mas mabuting meron kang strategy sa pag-i-invest para hindi ka mahirapan sa huli. So isipin mo na lang kung magsisimula kayo sa pag-iipon at ipapasok mo ito sa investment na may 6% interest per taon. Ang kaya kayang posibleng makapit nito after 5 years. Hindi na masama, di ba? Asset number 2, CDs or Certificate of Deposits. Kung ikaw ang tipo ng tao na naghahanap ng isang secure at low-risk investment, ito na ang pinakamagandang investment para sa iyo. Ang CDs or Certificate of Deposits ay isang produkto ng mga bangko na nagbibigay ng mas mataas na interest kumpara sa iyong regular savings. Simple lang kung paano ito gumagana. Una, syempre dapat meron kang ipon, pera na nakalaan lamang sa investment, pera na hindi mo gagalawin at gagamitin sa ibang bagay. Pangalawa, ilagay mo ito sa bangko as time deposit at hayaan mo sila muna ang gagamit ng iyong pera. Pangatlo, kailangan mo lang hintayin ang maturity ng iyong investment. At pang-apat, ibabalik na ng bangko ang inilang nilang pera sa iyo kasama ang pagkasunduan ng interes. Kung ang regular savings account ay nagbibigay lang ng 0.1 to 0.5% interest sa iyong ipon taon-taon, ang CDs ay kayang magbigay ng average 4% taon-taon, pero depende pa rin yan sa offer ng mga bangko. Posibleng mas maliit o mas malaki pa ang pwede mong kitain na interest. Ang maturity ng ganitong investment ay nagmumula 6 months hanggang 5 years. Kapag na hindi mo gagalawin ang iyong pera hanggang sa maturity period nito, mas malaking interest ang pwede mong kitain. Isa pang kagandahan sa ganitong investment, aside sa malaking interest, protected ito ng FDIC o Philippine Deposit Insurance Corporation. Kung sakaling nalugi yung nagsara ang bangko na nilagyan mo ng iyong pera, kaya nilang ibalik ang halaga na hindi lumagpas ng 500,000 pesos. Ang risk naman dito ay kapag lumagpas ng 500,000 pesos, ang pera mo sa bangko ay meron kang 570,000 pesos sa iyong savings account. Kung ang nilagyan mo nito, unfortunately, 500,000 pesos lang ang kaya nilang ibalik mo lang ang maximum na halaga ng FDIC. Pero bihira ang nalugi. Gumagawa rin sila ng paraan para maiwasan ito. Kaya kung naghahanap ka ng safe investment, yung parang nag-iipon ka lang, magandang panimula ang ganitong investment. Kung gusto mong sumubok, puntahan mo lang ang mga bangko sa inyong lugar at mag-inquire ka tungkol dito at ikumpara mo kung sinong bangko may pinakamagandang offer. Asset number 3, REITs o Real Estate Investment Trust. Ang real estate ay isa sa mga subok at profitable investments na available sa market ngayon. Pero kung di lang nagkakaroon ng ganitong asset dahil sa obvious na dahilan, kailangan mo ng malaking kapital para mag-ari ng isang property. Kaya kung sakto lang ang iyong pera ngayon, pero gusto mong mag-invest sa real estate, magandang option ang REITs o Real Estate Investment Trust. Katulad ng ibang investment, bibili ka ng REIT shares sa isang kumpanya na nagmamayari ng isang real estate properties. Gagamitin nila ang iyong pera sa pag-expand ng kanilang business, kagaya ng mga hotel, mall, apartment, at commercial building. Nagkakatanggap sila ng income galing sa kanilang mga properties at ikaw bilang isang shareholder ng kanilang kumpanya, bibigyan ka rin nila ng dividend o interest sa perang ininvest mo sa kanila. Ang maganda sa ganitong investment ay low risk at mataas na profit ang kayang ibalik sa iyo. Average 3 to 8% interest per year ang pwede mong kitain. Simple lang kung paano mag-invest sa REITs. Kailangan mo lang bumili ng shares sa mga malalaking kumpanya na mayroong real estate properties gaya ng Ayala Land, Double Dragon Properties, Robinson's Land Commercial, Philinvest, Megaworld at Crystal Land. Magkakabili ka nito sa mga accredited online broker ng Philippine Stock Exchange gaya ng Full Financial, BPI Trade, First Metro Securities at BDO Securities. Ang kikitain mo sa ganitong investment ay nakabase sa performance ng kumpanya na nilagyan mo ng iyong pera. Kaya mabuting pag-aralan mo muna kung sinong kumpanya ang consistent na may malaking return bago ka mag-invest. Isa pang maganda sa ganitong investment ay ang kanyang liquidity. Ibig sabihin, pwede mong i-withdraw anytime ang iyong pera dahil nakatrade ito sa loob ng Philippine Stock Exchange. Hindi katulad ng time deposit na merong maturity at posible ka pang ma-penalize kung i-withdraw mo ng maaga ang iyong pera. Ang REITs ay isa sa mga safe investment na pwede mo simulan ngayon at maganda itong idagdag sa ibang mga investment. Asset number 4, business o sariling negosyo. Isa ring magandang asset ang pagkakaroon ng negosyo. Ito ang madalas na goal ng karamihan, especially mga employee. Dahil sa negosyo, flexible ang iyong oras. At kapag natatakbo mo ito ng maayos, posibleng kikita ka ng 10 times mahigit sa sahod mo sa iyong trabaho. Ang inaakala ng karamihan, kailangan mo ng malaking kapital para magsimula ng negosyo. At dahil sa ganitong ideya, wala na silang masisimulan. Ang hindi lang nila alam, maraming negosyo ang pwede mong simulan ngayon, gamit lang ang maliit na puhunan. Kung gusto mong malaman ang mga negosyo na yun, panoorin mo ang nagawa na naming video tungkol dito. Hanapin mo na lang ang link sa description at comment section ng video nito. Ang pagkakaroon ng negosyo ay hindi biro, mas risky ito na investment dahil posible ka talagang malugi rito. Ayon nga sa report, 80 to 95% ng mga small businesses ay nagsara at nalugi sa loob ng 5 taon na pag-ooperate. Obserbahan mo na lang yung mga food cart sa loob ng mall. Nakikita mo pa rin ba hanggang ngayon ang mga nagtitinda 5 years ago? Malaki ang chance na majority sa kanila ay walang maibabalik na profit sa kanilang negosyo kaya sila nagsara. Kaya napakabuting maglaan ka muna ng sapat na oras para pag-aralan kung ano yung fundamentals sa negosyo. Dahil madalas na nangyayari kaya nag-fail ang isang negosyo, hindi dahil pangit yung product nila, kundi hindi alam ng business owner ang tamang pagpapatakbo ng kanyang negosyo. Pero kahit ganun pa man, kahit medyo risky ang pagnenegosyo, mataas pa rin ang iyong chance na mag-succeed at makuha ang malaking reward kung willing ka na matuto at mag-adapt sa condition ng market. Asset number 5, ginto. Alam naman natin lahat ang popularity at halaga ng ginto. Malaking parte ito sa ating kasaysayan dahil meron ng gold ng sinaunang panahon at isa ito sa pinakaon ng currency o pera na ginagamit ng mga tao dati. Ika nga sa statement ng Robert Kiyosaki, gold is God's money. Magandang investment ang ginto dahil bihira lang bumababa ang halaga nito. Sa katunayan, mas lalo pang tumaas ang value ng gold noong nagdaang pandemic. Sa tingin ko, mas mabuting mag-store ka ng ginto sa halip na cash dahil mapoprotektahan nito ang purchasing power o halaga ng iyong pera at yan ang main purpose ng pag-i-invest sa gold. Kahit hindi siya ang uri ng investment na magbibigay sa iyo ng malaking income, puro kaya naman yung protektahan ang iyong yaman. Merong iba't ibang strategy ang mga taong nag-i-invest sa gold. It's either bumibili sila ng physical gold sa mga pawn shop ng bangko o hindi naman kaya nag-i-invest sila sa mga kumpanya na nagninila ng ginto. Kung interesado kang pumasok sa ganitong investment, wala akong ibang maipapayo kundi pag-aralan mo ito ng mabuti at huwag basta magtitiwala sa mga taong nagbebenta ng ginto, especially online. Mas mabuting bumili ka lang sa mga trusted na pawn shop. Lahat ng investment ay mayroong kasamang risk, kaya napakahalagang mag-aaral ka ng mabuti sa investment na plano mong pasukan. Dahil ikaw ang nagmamanage ng iyong mga asset, dapat ay marunong ka rin gumawa ng mabuting desisyon at makapag-desisyon ka lang ng maayos kapag marami kang buwan sa iyong investment. So in summary, ang limang assets na pwede mong lagyan ng iyong pera ay number 1, pag-ibig in P2, number 2, CDs or Certificate of Deposits, number 3, REITs o Real Estate Investment Trust, number 4, business o negosyo, at number 5, ginto. Sa limang assets na tinalakay natin ngayon, alin sa mga ito ang parang mong simulan at sa iyong opinion, ano pang investment na magandang pasukan? Magbigay ka ng comment sa ito pa. Sana ay marami kang natutunan sa video natin ngayong araw. Huwag kalimutan mag-subscribe para lagi kang updated sa bagong videos na i-upload namin. I-like, mag-comment, at i-share mo rin ang video ito sa iyong mga kaibigan. Maraming salamat sa panunood at sana ay magtagumpay ka. Alam natin lahat na magsimula ng isang negosyo ay hindi madali. Kailangan mong magkaroon ng lakas ng loob at iwasang magpabaya sa paggawa ng mga desisyon. Dahil alam mo na ang bawat negosyo ay meron kasamang risk. Pero kahit ganun pa man, marami pa rin sa atin motivated ng negosyo dahil sa mga dahilan ito. Una ay para ma-express natin ang ating mga hilig kung mga bagay na meron tayong interest. Pangalawa ay dahil sa time freedom. Kahit hindi pa masyadong malaki ang iyong negosyo, meron ka pa rin choice na magpahinga paminsan-minsan at pagandahin ang iyong lifestyle. Pangatlo ay magkakaroon ka ng maraming karanasan na siyang magpapabago ng iyong pananaw sa buhay. Pangapat ay marami kang matututunan, which is kinakailangan mo para maka-adapt sa mundo na patuloy na nagbabago. Panglima ay mataas ang tsansa na makikita ka ng malaking halaga at yumaman. At pang-anim ay pwede mo itong ipamana sa iyong mga anak. Maraming magagandang benefit na makukuha natin sa pagnenegosyo. At alam din natin na mas rewarding ito kumpara sa pagtatrabaho. Kaya hindi na tayo magtataka kung bakit common goal ito ng karamihan. Siguro ay interesado ka rin pasukin ang mundo ng pagnenegosyo. Meron kang sapat na pera ngayon at gusto mong malaman kung saan ito maganda ilagay o anong mga negosyo ang magandang simulan. Ang katotohanan na marami ng business opportunities na available ngayon. Kahit sa maliit na kapital ay pwede ka nang magsimula. Pero at the end of the day, ang goal natin lahat ay maging profitable ang ating negosyo at ma-minimize ang mga possible risks. Kaya ang dapat mong i-consider ay hindi lang kung anong negosyo ang magandang simulan, kundi kung anong negosyo ang may mataas na success rate. At yan ang pag-uusapan natin ngayon. Ibabahagi ko sa iyo ang 4 na negosyo na mayroong mataas na success rate. At ibabahagi ko rin sa iyo ang ilang payo na dapat mong i-consider kung balak mong pasukin ang mga negosyo nito. Siguraduhin mapanood mo ang buong video at ilista mo rin ang mga talagang aral. Subok ng daganan. Sa simulan na natin talakayin ang unang negosyo. Ang unang negosyo na mayroong mataas na success rate ay ang cleaning services. Sa panahon natin ngayon, halos na ang tao ay busy at walang sapat na oras para linisin ang kanilang mga gamit, isang magandang opportunity na masolusyonan ang ganitong problema. Ang patuloy na pagtaas sa demand ng cleaning services ngayon ay isang magandang senyales para simulan ng ganitong uri ng negosyo. Kailangan mo lang mamili kung anong klase ng cleaning service ang gusto mong ibigay sa mga tao. Merong detailing service o car wash, house cleaning, shoe cleaning, laundry at iba pa. Mga ilang bagay na dapat mo consider sa pagsisimula ng ganitong negosyo maliban sa business plan, registration at marketing strategy ay una, kailangan mo mag-research. Bago mapasukin ang industriya ng cleaning services, mahalagang mag-research ka muna kung ano ang mga pangangailangan ng iyong target market, anong serbisyo ang mayroong mataas na demand, at obserbahan mo rin kung ano ang diskarte ng iyong mga competitor. Pag-aralan mo rin kung ano ang iba't ibang method sa paglilinis at anong mga kapitan na kakailanganin sa pagsisimula ng iyong negosyo. Pwede kang umattend ng isang training o mag-research online. Pangalawa ay ang iyong services at pricing. Pagplanuhan mo mabuti kung anong serbisyo ang ibibigay mo sa iyong mga customer. At ang pricing naman ay kailangan mo itong ibase sa mga bagay na kakailanganin mo sa paglilinis, ang haba ng oras na kailangan mong ilaan, at kung gaano kalaki ang bagay at space na kailangan mong linisan. Para magkaroon ka ng dagdag kaalaman sa services at tamang presyo ng iyong serbisyo, pwede kang mag-research sa common offer ng iyong mga competitor. Pangatlo ay ang mga kagamitan. Mahalagang mag-invest ka sa tamang kagamitan para mapanatili mo ang magandang quality ng iyong serbisyo. Mga iilang kagamitan na kailangan mo ay vacuum cleaner, cleaning solutions, brush, gloves, mask, blower, timba, at iba pa. Mag-research ka kung ano ang brand ng mayroong matibay at kalidad ng mga produkto para mapakinabangan mo ng matagal ang iyong mga gamit. Pang-apat ay mag-hire ka ng masipag at competent na empleyado. Isa sa mga sikreto ng matagumpay na negosyo ay ang pagpili ng tamang empleyado. Yung empleyado na marunong sa kanilang trabaho at marunong din makitulong sa mga customer. Maraming benefit ang pagkakaroon ng tamang empleyado. Una ay ang quality ng serbisyo. Merong quality dahil hindi sila nagmamadali. Pangalawa ay magkakaroon ka ng mga loyal customers. Dahil merong quality sa iyong serbisyo, marami rin ang satisfied clients. At pangatlo, iwas sakit sa ulo. Nakakadagdag din ng stress ang mga empleyado na walang pakit sa kanilang ginagawa. At kahit sinong business owner ang tanongin mo, ay isang to sa kanilang problema. Kaya mahalagang mag-invest ka ng oras at pera sa iyong mga empleyado. Ituro mo sa kanila ang mga dapat nilang matutunan at ibigay mo rin sa kanila ang nararapat na sahod at mga incentives base sa binibigay nilang serbisyo. Ang pangalawang negosyo na mayroong mataas na success rate ay ang rental business. Minsan sa ating buhay ay naranasan natin magrenta. Mapagadget na yan, bahay, damit, sasakyan, bike, heavy-duty equipment at iba pang mga bagay na pwedeng pakinabangan. Noon hanggang ngayon ay patuloy tayong nakaka-benefit sa ganitong uri ng servisyo. Dahil minsan, mas magandang option ng magrenta kasi may gastos pa tayong malaki para binili ang sarili ng gamit. Ang demand sa ganitong uri ng negosyo ay hindi nawawala. Sa katunayan, isa ito sa mga fastest growing industries ngayong taon at expected na patuloy pa itong lalago sa hinaharap. Pero nagbabalak ang magsimula ng sarili mong negosyo, isang option. Narito kung paano ito simulan. Kailangan mo alamin kung anong bagay o asset ang magandang iparenta. Minsan, ipapase sa kung ano ang malakas na paligid. Halimbawa, kung maraming mga turista, pwede kang magparenta ng bike, hindi naman kaya ay motor. Pwede rin ang mga gadget at cellphone. Pangalawa ay gumawa ka ng business plan. Lahat ng negosyo ay nangangailangan ng ating pagpaplano. Ang plano na gagawin mo ay ang iyong guide sa pag-operate ng iyong negosyo. Dapat naglalaman ito ng layunin ng iyong negosyo, kung sino ang iyong target market, finance, at marketing strategy. Huwag natin kalimutan na ang risk ay hindi mawawala sa pagnenegosyo. At ito ang dahilan kung bakit kailangan natin gumawa ng business plan para maiwasan natin ang mga potential risk at para mabigay din natin ang magandang serbisyo sa mga tao. Dahil once nakuha mo na ang bagay na gusto mong puntahan, patuloy ka rin sa nervous na kumuha ng iyong mga gamit. Pang-apat ay ang registration at business permit. Kailangan mo magparehistro sa BPI at tingnan ang business permit mula sa iyong lokal na munisipyo para masigurado manigal ang iyong negosyo. Pang-lima ay ang pricing at terms and conditions. Kailangan mo mabuti ang pricing ng iyong business base sa market demand at condition. Gumawa ka rin ng malinang rental agreement para maiwasan mo ang hindi pagkakaunawaan sa iyong mga customer at para na rin maiwasan mo ang tumastos na malaki in case na meron nasira sa iyong mga gamit or worse kung hindi na sinulit. Pangalan may gumawa kang marketing strategy. Pagkatapos mo gumawa ng business plan at pag-acquire ng mga bagay na gusto mong parintahan, kailangan mo naman i-expose ang iyong negosyo doon sa iyong mga target customer. Magandang i-leverage mo ang social media katulad ng Facebook, Instagram, at TikTok. Sa mga social media platforms na yan, ay pwede kang magpatakbo ang iyong marketing campaign. The more na maganda ang offer mo sa iyong mga customer, mataas ang chance na marami ang gustong magrenta ng iyong mga gamit, which is ang susi kung paano magtagumpay sa ganitong uri ng negosyo. At ang huling hakbang sa pagsisimula ng rental business ay dapat meron kang magandang customer service. Aside sa paggawa ng marketing strategy at pagpaparenta ng magandang paglalitan, kailangan mo rin magbigay ng magandang servisyo sa mga tao. Isa ito sa magandang paraan kung paano magkaroon ng loyal customers. Ang experience nila sa iyong servisyo ay sasabihin nila ito sa kanilang mga kaibigan.
Sa kining grupo?
Sa social media,
Paratero.
ibigay ng free marketing sa iyong negosyo. Ang tatlong negosyo na may taas na success rate ay ang barbershop. Kahit saan ka magpunta ay pwede mo makikita natin ang iba't ibang klase ng gupit sa kanilang nakita. Meron ang stars ng India, sa 2000s, at meron na rin mga modern hairstyle. Ang ating haircut ay isa sa mga kinoconsider natin pagdating sa pagborma. Dahil aside sa pagsuot ng magagandang damit at sapatos, mahalagang kaaya-aya rin tingnan ang ating hairstyle. Alam kasi natin ang pagkalinis kong tingnan, ang dating puso ng tao ay iba at pinaparating mo rin sa kanila na pinapahalagahan mo ang iyong sarili. Ang demand sa servisyo na binibigyan ng barbershop ay hindi nawawala dahil sa katotohanan ng patuloy na tumutubo ang ating mga buhok. Ang bagong gupit ay isa sa mga maintenance natin sa katawan. Kaya mahalagang i-take advantage ng ganitong opportunity. Ang mga iilang bagay na dapat mong isaalang-alang sa pagsisimula ng barbershop ay una, ihanda mo ang kakailanganin ng kapital. Kailangan mo puntahin lahat ng mga gastusin mula sa mga kapital, renta, renovation, business permits, labor, marketing, at iba pa. Pangalawa ay piliin mo ang tamang lokasyon. Ang pagpili ng lokasyon ay isa sa mahalagang aspect sa tagumpay na barbershop. Ang lugar na mayroong mataas na foot traffic katulad ng mall, palengke, at malapit sa opisina. Mahalaga rin na matagal itong mapuntahan at may sapat na espasyo para sa iyong mga upuan, kagamitan, at waiting area. Kung ako ay mag-invest ka sa mga dekalidad na kagamitan, isa ito sa pagdadagdag ng convenience sa binibigay mo ng servisyo sa iyong mga customer. Katulad ng magandang upuan, or creeper, pangahit, mga gunting, at iba pang mga grooming products. At kailangan maghanap ka ng mahusay na barbero. Ang tagumpay ng iyong barbershop ay nakasalalay sa kalitan ng iyong servisyo. Dahil sa pagdating ng mga plan ng barbero na hindi magaling ang pagkakito, hindi rin mayroon yung skills sa pagkakaroon sa paggugupit at yung marunong din matutungo sa mga customer. Panglima ay kailangan ng tutukan ng iyong negosyo. Gawin mong priority ang magpanatili at kalidad ng iyong servisyo at magagawa ito sa pamamagitan ng maayos na pamamahala. Pwede kang magsagawa ng regular training sa iyong mga barbero, panatiling malinis at kaaya-aya ang paligid ng iyong barbershop, at i-welcome rin ang feedback at suggestion ng mga customer. Ang pagtatayo ng barbershop ay nangangailangan ng sipag, tiyaga at tamang diskarte. Sa pamamagitan ng masusing pagpaplano at dedikasyon, maaari kang magtagumpay sa industriyang ito at magkaroon ng matatag na negosyo na magbibigay sa iyo ng magandang kita. Ang pang-apat na negosyo na mayroong mataas na success rate ay ang grocery store. Pagkain at inumin ang unang kailangan ng ating katawan para mag-survive. Kaya ang grocery ang unang gastusin at pinaglalaanan ng ating pera kada buwan. Mawala na ang budget sa mga luho, huwag lang ang budget sa grocery. Kaya isa lang ang ibig sabihin nito. Ang grocery store ay hindi nawawala ng demand at isa ito sa sa malaking advantage ng grocery store kumpara sa ibang negosyo. At kapatunayan na ito ng nagdaang pandemya. Halos lahat ng negosyo ay nagsara maliban sa grocery store. Kahit challenging sigla ng negosyo nito sa panahon ngayon dahil sa dami ng kompetisyon, mataas pa rin ang iyong chance na mag-succeed as long as masipag ka at mayroong diskarte. Narito ang ilang tips sa pagsisimula ng grocery store. Una, ang iyong marketing strategy. Bago mo pasukin ang negosyo ito, kailangan mo munang tanggapin ang katotohanan na marami ng mga nauna sa iyo. So kailangan mong gumawa ng paraan kung paano mag-stand out ang iyong negosyo sa market. Pwedeng idaan ito sa pagpapaganda ng iyong tindahan, pagtitinda ng mga produkto na bihira lang makita sa ibang store, at ang pinakamalaga sa lahat ay ang presyo ng iyong mga paninda. Kahit gaano kaganda ang iyong tindahan, kung namamahala naman ang mga tao, mahahatid po rin talaga nito ang iyong sales. Pangalawa ay ang pagkakaroon ng direct supplier. Karamihan sa mga grocery store ay wholesale na binibili ang kanilang mga paninda, kaya mas malaki ang kanilang matitipid. Ito ang sikreto kung paano ka makakapagbenta ng mga murang paninda and at the same time, meron ka pa rin kikitain. Kung wala kang ideya kung saan maghanap ng supplier, pwede kang mag-research online o sumali sa Facebook community. Pwede ka rin pumunta ng bayan at magtanong sa mga tindahan kung sino ang kanilang supplier at kung paano makonta. Pangatlo ay dapat hands-on ka sa iyong negosyo. Sa pagsisimula ng grocery store ay kailangan mo ng manpower. At mahalagang hands-on ka rin sa iyong negosyo para matutukan mo ang iyong mga tauhan at ang operasyon ng iyong negosyo. At pang-apat ay good customer service. Sa kahit anong negosyo na involved ang pagtitinda, mahalagang i-consider mo rin ang pagbibigay ng magandang pagkikitungo sa iyong mga customer. Dahil sa customer na galing ang perang kikitain ng iyong negosyo. At para maging loyal sila, mahalagang bigyan din natin sila ng magandang servisyo. Ang grocery store ay hindi lang ang isang tindahan na meron ang paninda, kundi mahalagang parte ng ating pang-araw-araw o pamumuhay. Ang mataas na demand sa grocery store ay isang magandang opportunity para pasukin ang ganitong uri ng negosyo sa pamamagitan ng paggawa ng marketing strategy, business plan, paghahanap ng reliable supplier, pagiging hands-on sa iyong negosyo, at pag-hire ng mga mapagkatiwalaang tauhan, mataas ang iyong tsansa na magtagumpay. At yan ang apat na negosyo na meron mataas na success rate. Sa apat na negosyo na pinalagay natin ngayon, alin sa mga ito ang marami kang kapamilya at interesado mong subukan. Magbigay ka ng iyong comment sa ibaba. Sana ay marami kang natutunan sa video natin ngayon. Huwag kalimutan mong subscribe para lagi kang updated sa mga bago na mga videos. I-like kung gusto mo mga topic natin ngayon. Mag-comment kung may mga natutunan. At i-share mo na rin ang video ito sa iyong mga kaibigan. Maraming salamat sa panonood. At sana ay magtagumpay ka. Kapag mayroon kang 10,000 pesos ngayon at mayroon kang kakayahan na bibilhin ito ng taon, hindi mo pa ma-appreciate ang growth ng iyong pera sa unang taon na pagpupoble ito dahil alam mo na hindi malaking halaga ang 20,000 pesos. Pero kapag tinuloy mo lang ang pagpoble ng iyong pera, after 10 years ay meron ka ng 5,120,000 pesos. Yan ang kapangyarihan ng compounding. Ang compounding ay hindi lang apply sa numbers. Magagamit din ito sa ating habit kapag paulit-ulit natin ginagawa ang isang bagay, mabuti man ang masama, meron din compounding na mangyayari sa kanyang harap. Imagine meron dalawang binata na ang pangalan ay Pete at Jason. Pareho silang magpangarap at goal na guminawa ang buhay sa kanilang pagtanda. Si Pete ay 25 years old. Si Jason naman ay mas bata ng 2 taon. Si Pete ay pagtapos ng college. Kumpara kay Jason na naging officer, ang monthly income ni Pete ay 20,000 pesos. Sa account kay Jason ay 50,000 pesos. Ang paboritong lipatin ni Pete pagkakaroon ng pag-aaral ay magkasangkito ang araw at review sa mga successful tao at makikinig ng mga klasik para magluluto. Ginagawa niya ito para matutunan ang ginagawa at least para din ng mga tao na sa top 20%. Magaling din si Pete sa paghawak ng kanyang pera. Meron siyang budget na sinusunod